If you were here last night, you remember Murray Hidary. He gave an amazing talk on the future of music and some of the physics and science behind music, which was just thrilling. And then he gave a tremendous concert performance that was out of this world, literally. It was out of this world. It was so great. And right now we get to have a conversation where Murray's going to share about, we're going to talk about the mental models of music and how we can understand music, and how that will enhance our understanding of the world around us. Murray is a classically trained pianist. He's trained, I'm kind of doing this off the top of my head, forgive me, Murray. He's classically trained pianist. He's an evolutionary pianist in blending his performances with mind travel. He's done over 600 live mind travels where he's playing music live and taking people to a different place spiritually, emotionally, mentally with his music. And he's also a trained, not a therapist, but kind of in grief counseling. And so he incorporates that therapy into his music. So you really get some emotional safety as well as emotional release with his music performances. It's truly out of this world. And he's just a really, really smart guy. We had so much fun talking on the phone about Virtual Burning Man. We're like, we need to just have a conversation about mental models, and that'll be a talk, and people will love it. And so, Murray, it's so great to have you here.
Awesome, Robert. Great to be here again with you in the virtual playa. It's fantastic to be here. Last night was super fun. When we all converge in Black Rock City, the one thing I can't bring with me is my Steinway piano right here behind me. So it's the one upside to virtual Burning Man is being able to share my music through my baby.
Oh goodness, it was tremendous. I got on the massage table. It had like the heating pad underneath, and I turned like my Klipsch speakers on, which are really good speakers. I'm like, oh yeah, take me there, baby. It was it was a trip.
Yeah.
Okay.
The famous composer, the French composer Claude Debussy, one of my favorite composers, he said, abandon yourself and let the music do with you as it will. And that's kind of the headspace I try to get into every time I sit down at the piano. It's not just for the listener, but for the performer, and not just for the performer, but for the listener as well. It's about, can we abandon into the music? So yeah. Are you ready to kick off?
Yeah, I'm just checking our technology here. I got this, after I've made a couple mistakes, I got this process here. So we are recording.
Okay.
Your sound sounds great. You are labeled speaker and your co-host. And streaming, we're streaming into the different universes, and on Facebook and on YouTube. And that looks good. And then we also got people here live with us on the Zoom call. So right. We are rocking. So yeah, we are ready to go. And so the idea here is that my goal is to really kind of tap into some of the genius that Murray has and kind of extract out some of his understanding of the mental models of music for us lay people, so that we can have a deeper, richer understanding of music, both for the intellectual joy of it, but also for the physical understanding that we can then incorporate into our lives and have a deeper appreciation and enjoyment of music. So first, Murray, I'd like to ask you, from your talk last night, which was just riveting, what do you think people should know about music to understand it from a mental model perspective? For example, music rippling out for billions of light years. That just blows my mind. And I would need to just visualizing that would take me so long to try to see a billion light years of that music rippling out is mind blowing. And then the idea of using sound for healing, not just Tibetan singing bowls and aligning your chakras and the reducing stress, but targeting cancer cells with sound is a phenomenal idea, and using sound and vibration to heal by targeting unhealthy cells in the body is phenomenal. So what do you think from last night's talk would be helpful in giving people a grounding and understanding of music and the mental models of music?
Yeah, I think what we addressed last night, which let's begin with that concept of really reframing how we think about music. Music can operate on many levels, right? We can think about music in terms of entertainment, in terms of escape. There's a lot of ways to experience music and to frame music. But what I'm proposing is that we really kind of think about the whole universe as music. So that music shifts from this kind of thing we experience every once in a while, either we're playing it or we're listening to it, we're consuming it, to really understanding that the universe is music. it is, as we know, on every level, a infinite spectrum of frequencies, vibrations, waves, and this is something that, you know, we experience directly through our senses, but the vast majority, of course, of frequencies are hidden from us, are just out of our reach and our perceptions. So we can certainly build tools to experience them. And so, you know, of course, we have microwaves in our kitchen that enable us to leverage those frequencies, and radios and televisions, and of course electromagnetism with our phones, our smartphones, our internet access, and we're all connecting now through frequencies and waves. But even beyond that, there are frequencies and spectra that are beyond our grasp. And we talked about it in the context of the small and the large. You know, from the smallest frame of the universe, we think about the quantum field and quantum particles, you know, the smallest potential you can think of. And that is literally operating as frequencies, right? As expanding and collapsing quantum wave functions, and all the way up through the grandest way to think about the universe at the cosmological level, right? We talked about gravitational waves that literally, when you've got, you know, either two black holes kind of smashing together and merging, or two neutron stars coming together, that they, in that just incredible explosion, they ripple out these gravitational waves that ripple through billions of light years of space-time. And, you know, and we've only recently, in the last decade, actually been able to measure and prove that through the LIGO system, the apparatus that our incredible scientists have built. But they're actually in very specific frequencies, and I believe one of them was actually in the frequency that would translate to the key of C on the piano. So again, this is happening, you know, across billions of light years, and the universe is musical. And we also know, and we can look at the mental model of everything having this, you know, complete interconnection. And so you have all these overlapping and interwoven frequencies and rhythms that all harmonize to this cosmic symphony. And that's the kind of ultimate mental model that I approach things on.
It's the cosmic symphony. Now I'm going to take you down to really practical. So this pen, this is the most simple object I could find. Well, maybe this rock, but it's, you know, a gratitude rock. So it's a little complex. How is this rock music? So if someone, I said, the whole universe is music, there's this cosmological symphony going on, they say, all right, rock, how is this part of the symphony?
Great. That's a beautiful question, actually, and a great example, because if we can't find it in the mundane and the simple and the banal, then, you know, it's easy to find it in, you know, the grand, right? I can talk about, you know, gravitational waves and exploding stars, and it's easy to see it there. But can we find it in something as mundane as a common rock? And the answer is a resounding yes. So, you know, I'm going to explain it and kind of express my opinion about it in two ways. The first is, of course, we know that within everything, whether it's quote unquote alive or dead, you know, a rock is, you know, not alive in the sense that we think of it as alive, but there certainly is motion. There's vibrational motion inside of everything that has atomic structure. And so the molecules, the atoms, the subatomic particles, the electrons, the quantum wave functions that are taking place within that rock are certainly a type of music. Now, there's even a more beautiful way to think about it, in my opinion, and that is that when we think of inanimate objects, we tend to think of them in a static capacity, right? That rock probably has existed, maybe in different shapes or in different places, for tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. And some rocks and mountains, of course, much longer than that. Billions of years, the Earth being approximately 4.5 billion years old. And so we think of these things as static. Now, we know that music certainly is not static, right? So if we're trying to compare this to music, well, that's like the furthest thing you'd think from music, right? Something static for billions of years versus music, which is ephemeral. It only exists in the moment, right? You play a note and it immediately decays. Its entropic force just dissipates out. And so when we think of inanimate objects, I'd like us to completely rethink how we think of inanimate objects. As opposed to thinking of them as static things, what if we were to consider them as events in time? Just like music is an event in time. So at some point, this rock that you just held up, hold it up again for everybody. Some people might have just joined us. So this beautiful rock, at some point, was not an assemblage of those atoms and molecules that you're holding in your hand, right? At some prior point in time, at some previous event history, if you were to kind of control Z over and over and over and over again on that rock, you would eventually end up with a bunch of disparate, separate atoms and particles flying through the universe that at some point, through a very strange and bizarre, cohesion of events, has conspired to not only come together to form this planet, but that rock on this planet. Now, that is a timeline of events and is in no way different, in my opinion, from a piece of music. I can't hear you, Robert. I think you're muted.
Yeah, so if we were to hit the redo button on the rock, on the creation of the universe, the creation of the rock over and over again, it wouldn't always be like this. It would be a bunch of different things. And so this rock is just one manifestation of piece of time, but it's actually
and in our frame
as well.
Yeah, and Robert, in our frame of time, we can't even wrap our head around that, right? I mean, it's not something that would occur to us typically, right? We have a hard time, wrapping our head around, a month or a year or a decade, let alone a century or 1,000 years or, or 1,000,000 years. Like that just seems like an eternity. But from the reference point of the universe, it's a moment, it's a blip, it's a split second from a universal standpoint.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And so I have a lot of interesting questions to ask you. I want to ask you what I hope to get this at some point is about recreating a human being based upon the music they've written or played. So if we took the music of Mozart, we feed that into a supercomputer, and then, by the way, tell them the history of Mozart's life, and then would this spit out a human being that talked like Mozart and thought like Mozart. But I want to get to that a little bit later. What else about the physics of music are people missing out on in understanding the magnitude, the beauty, the cosmic symphony? What else can people? What are some models and frameworks people can use to understand music at this higher level?
So probably one of the most beautiful aspects of music is, first of all, to understand that music is an outpouring of mathematics that we can hear. We're actually hearing the mathematics and the symmetry of nature, the symmetry of the universe, as music, as a psychological phenomenon in our brains, right? So, okay, first let's remember what music is, right? Music is not out there in the world, okay? It's important to really grasp this. And a good way to think about it is if you have a speaker in a room blasting music and you were to leave the room, now there's no people in the room. What's happening in the room? So is there music in the room? Is the sound of music in the room? So I think most people would say, yes, of course, the speaker's playing, there's music in the room. Well, to be sure, right, there's going to be energy coming from the speaker, which is, the membrane of the speaker is going to compress and rarefy the air molecules right around it, and that's going to reverberate around the room, bounce around the walls, and you're going to have a lot of moving air particles around the room. The idea that it sounds like anything is strictly in our minds. It is strictly a psychological phenomenon that's taking place in the synapses of our head. It's not out there. It's in your mind only. It's the translation of analog to digital. It's the translation of moving mechanical waves, transverse waves, longitudinal waves into your brain, which with the hairs on your ear, by the way, there's a zillion of them, and each one is tuned to a different frequency, to like antenna that pick it up and then translate it into an electric signal, to digital information inside of your brain, which for some amazing reason converts it into this thing we experience as music, which then even more phenomenally has some emotional impact on us. And it's tied to our hypothalamus, our movement centers. We tend to want to move our bodies. And of course, then we have dance, right? So all of that's tied together. So I think it's first and foremost most important to understand the miracle that music fundamentally is as a phenomenon, right? As a natural phenomenon. Now, the actual frequencies that are generated, you know, when I play the scale on the piano or any piece, are generated using this idea in physics called the harmonic series. And the harmonic series, or the overtone series, another name for it, is a miraculous mathematical symmetry. It was originally discovered by Pythagoras many thousands of years ago. And essentially what it tells us is that when you hear a certain pitch, you're not only hearing that note. So let's say I hit the note C, that we call that the fundamental. We're not just hearing the note C, but we're hearing lots of notes above that in a specific order of symmetry of frequencies. And it's not only C's that we hear higher and higher up, but we hear many, many other pitches. And actually, when you actually look at the calculation of the harmonic series, it is an actually infinite series that continues, infinitely. So that is a beautiful construct, because what that tells me is that when I hear one note, I am hearing every note. I mean, just kind of wrap your head around that for a second. And the reason why music sounds the way it does to us is because hidden within the fundamental, hidden within the frequency, is all this other information that we don't quote unquote hear, but we hear it. And that's just another miracle of music. Now, the actual formula for the harmonic series is another one of these beautiful formulas. And I say a beautiful formula because mathematically, it's one of these formulas that simultaneously, just like, you know, the Euler's formula, another beautiful formula, just like, you know, how we derive these incredible numbers, like, you know, like pi and like Euler's number. But essentially, it is a number, it is a formula that on the one hand, it goes to the infinite. Okay, it keeps going and going and going, but it keeps going into an infinite set of numbers while those numbers are getting smaller and smaller and smaller at the same time. So what Pythagoras did was he took a string, he cut it in half, and that gave him the octave, right? An octave above the fundamental. He then cut it into thirds. So he went from whole to half to third to quarter to fifth to sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th. He kept going. That is actually an infinite series. You can keep going 1 over, and you just put, you know, a number under there, and you'll get additional overtone or harmonic frequencies. So the number gets smaller and smaller, right? 1,000th is a lot smaller than 1/2. So it'll keep getting smaller and smaller, but you have an infinite set of them. And that is a beautiful concept of on kind of these kind of opposing forces. One's getting infinitely large and one's getting infinitely small. And you could actually, if you actually meditate on that and other examples of it, it's one of the most mind expanding things I believe a human being can do.
Can you walk us through that meditation? So what's getting infinitely small is dividing the string in smaller and smaller pieces. And then what's getting infinitely large as that is getting infinitely small?
Well, you're able to continuously divide the string infinitely, right? So you'll never reach the end point of that exercise. If I tell you, pick a number, like let's pick a number from, okay, 0. What's the next number after 0, right? Well, okay, most people would say, well, 1, 1. I'll say, okay, well, that's fine. Is there anything in between 0 and 1? Well, of course there is. You say, well, a half. A half is between 0 and 1. Okay, great. Is there anything between 0 and a half? Oh, of course there is. There's a quarter, right? Okay. Well, is there anything between 0 and a quarter? Well, yeah, there's an eighth. Was anything between 0 and an eighth, right? And of course, there's many other options. But if you keep doing that exercise, you will never exhaust the options that are available to you.
So as it's getting infinitely long, it's getting infinitely small. So large is the length of the exercise. Then small is the division.
Yes, and let's keep in mind what infinity is, right? People think infinity is a number, but no, infinity is not actually a number. It is a set of numbers. It's a number of numbers. It's just like you can never get to the end of the set, but it's not itself a number, right? And so in both directions, right, you have this set that's getting infinitely large, and the numbers are getting infinitely small. And I think if you want to access kind of the beautiful symmetry of the universe, right, of it being this confluence of everything and nothing, right, the field and the particle, right, interacting, right, you can't have one without the other. It's this kind of dichotomy, this collapsing of this dichotomy that creates reality as we experience it as is. So if you want access to that, these are the kind of thought experiments that are helpful to get there, right? I mean, if you want to do one right now, like just think about, just state the next, in your mind, just state the next number after 0. Just say that number. So to do that, just like we just kind of did, right, you'd have to keep getting smaller and smaller, but you'd start with 0. And the next number would be, well, 0.0, 0, 0, 0, 0. And in your mind, you'd have to create an endless number of these zeros before you put the little 1. But you
I can't even get started in the exercise.
Yeah,
you don't get started at the next number. I can never even get started. That's amazing.
You would never get to the point where you would place the 1 to then get to the next number, because there's always another 0 that you can put to make it infinitely smaller than the 0 before.
That's how I used to feel about cleaning my room. It's like, where do I start? Well, I have to do that, and then that. By the time I get to 5, I'm like, wow, I'm just not going to clean my room. I'm just going to do this later.
I think of this as kind of like a mathematical koan, you know? I mean, like they use koans in the Zen Buddhist temples, right? To these kind of statements of logic, which when you actually think about it, they're paradoxes, and then they cause an eruptive enlightenment, right? In the meditator, in the practitioner. And I've spent a lot of time in Zen monasteries meditating, but nothing has had the kind of impact that thinking about the next number after 0, the expansion that can create in your mind is not only profound, but it's something to be like just bow down to. It's magnificent.
I'm gonna try to use that as a pattern interrupt. If I get upset this week, or if I'm stressed out, I'll be like, what's the next number after 0? I'll be like, well, that like an NLP pattern interrupt. I'm gonna try that. I had a couple questions that are pretty basic, right? I think are pretty interesting that they came up. So major chords versus minor chords. Major chords in general have a happy feeling. I'm very biased towards them, and then minor chords are slightly different, but have kind of are associated with a more negative tone. I know a lot of people who are very emotionally intelligent who like minor chords, that spending time in the minor. And so one is, I'm wondering how those came about as far as the with the major chord and sadder with a chord, or something that we associate with humans. And then I want to ask you about 432 versus 440, because a lot of people have heard of that differentiation but don't quite understand it. And then if we can get to it all, the idea of where our notes came from. So the notes in the octave. How do you divide up that string to get those notes, and then the flats and sharps? That's like, because I've heard the Asian instruments, or like a sitar, it doesn't have like the C chord on the sitar. Like it might, but it's done in a different way, right? And so I'm curious about how the theory of music behind that. So major versus minor chords, is that a human construct, or is that, how does that work?
Okay, these are all great questions. So let's break it down. So major, minor, they certainly have a consistent emotional impact on us, right? And to your point, people tend to associate major chords with something more joyful or happy, positive, versus minor chords, right, which are a bit more sad or melancholy. And that's certainly a consistent human emotional response to them. What's not known, of course, is if there's any direct physiological reason for that. Most likely it is this kind of nature versus nurture, right, argument, right, which is we've always heard music that has intended for these intervals to have that effect, and therefore we're so conditioned because of the music that we've grown up with and has been, conditioned not only for us as children, but across generation, right? It's like this epigenetic kind of conditioning that's already so embedded in our Western culture. Now, it's not the same for Eastern cultures, right? And you alluded to different notes and different scales in Eastern cultures. And there are differences in the perception of some of those intervals there. Different intervals have had different associations over time. In addition to the major and minor third, there's been, of course, the tritone, which is 3 whole steps. So if you have C, right, you'd go, D would be 1 whole step, E would be another whole step, F sharp would actually be the next whole step, so C to F sharp. That interval for many years, hundreds of years, was actually quote unquote banned. It was not allowed in the kind of institutional courts of music in Europe. It was called the diabolical interval, or Satan's interval, and it was truly banned for some period of time. The music and the church were very closely tied together for a long time, so there was a lot of influence, of course, on music by the church. Now, in terms of the intervals we hear today versus historically, they are different. The music we hear today is different than the music that people would have heard even just back 100, 200, 300 years ago. And that's because of our tuning system. So our tuning system has evolved over the centuries. Now, many people might be familiar, of course, with not only with Bach, I would hope so, but with a particular piece of his, a corpus called the Well-Tempered Clavier. It's the seminal work, one of the seminal works for the keyboard, and he calls it the Well-Tempered Clavier. Clavier is just another word for piano. He didn't have a piano like we have today. He had a harpsichord or a clavichord, but he had this well-temperament. So to temper something means to adjust it, right? And what they did was they actually adjusted the mathematical frequencies of the intervals to achieve a certain ends. So for instance, the 2 intervals they would consistently manipulate or temper were the 5th and the 3rd. And the reason is because those were really the most important intervals in the harmonic structures they were using. And for a period of time, the 3rd was considered to be more important than the 5th. So they optimized the tempering system or the tuning system for the 3rd to make it more perfect, to make it better. And the 5th was sacrificed. The 5th was actually made, at certain periods of time, was made smaller. So if the 5th was supposed to be this big in frequency, they made it a little bit smaller, almost imperceptible to the ear, so that the tuning of the 3rd, because everything is relative to one another, right? So the tuning of the 3rd could be more precise. Now, Bach came along and said, I want to adjust all that and create something called the Well-Tempered Clavier to write 24 pieces in every major and minor key to express actually the beauty of each key individually. And each piece kind of exploits what we call the key color of that key. Now, there's actually a misnomer, a misrepresentation in music education where people think that what he was trying to show was that you can play any piece in any key. And while that's technically true, it would actually have a different feeling if you played a piece in the key of C than if you played the piece in the key of D or E or F. Today, we actually do not use the well-tempered tuning system. It's evolved again to equal temperament. So when you sit down at the piano, you're using equal temperament. So the music actually sounds a little bit different than what not only Bach, but what Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin, all of them were tuning to. Some people are such purists that they find a tuner that says that will do a well temperament for them. But then you got to be careful what keys you're playing in, because truly different keys would have different impacts emotionally on you. Some are warmer, some are brighter, etc. Here today, they're trying to go for a neutrality, so you can play a piece in any key and have the same impact. Kind of like a singer, gets on stage and the accompanist might, transpose it instantly to match his or her, vocal range, right? Well, back then, pieces were written in a certain key, and they were only in that key, even singing. So if you look at the opera, and this gets to your next question about 432. If you look at the opera, opera's written, right, for different voices, and we know the soprano, the highest voice in the family, has a certain range to it. Now, some soprano, some will be a little higher, a little bit lower, but there's a certain range to it. Now, one of the great masters of opera was the Italian composer Verdi, and Verdi actually mandated that his pieces were played where A, the note A, equals 432 hertz. Now, typically in a tuning today, the average tuning would be about 440 hertz, so a little bit faster, which means it's a little bit higher, right? Which for a singer means it's a little bit harder to sing because it's a little bit higher. I mean, just a little bit. It's a fraction, but every little bit, can help. So Verdi was so adamant about this, kind of a fun anecdote, that actually he lobbied the Italian Parliament, Robert. He lobbied the Italian Parliament to make it a law, to mandate it into law that all opera would be at 432 hertz. And indeed, they passed that law, I believe it was in the late 1800s, 1880s or something like that. They mandated that law. Now, today, orchestras such as the New York Philharmonic and other philharmonics around the world actually tune higher to 442, 444. Some have been known to go up to 450. Now, why do they do that? Well, I think the conductors, the directors believe it sounds more exciting because it's a little higher, it's a little higher frequency. So it could be more exciting. Now, if you're a violinist, you don't really care. It's the same difficulty level. If you're a singer, of course, that would be potentially problematic. You're singing in some cases a quarter note or a half note almost higher than it's supposed to be from your training. So that's an important thing. Now, of course, all the notes in music, originate from our capacity as humans in terms of what our auditory range is. So, our range, kind of on the keyboard, it goes from about I don't have the charts in front of me, but I think it's about 16 hertz on the low bass end to about 20,000 hertz on the upper end. So you're looking at a huge, broad spectrum, and of course there's the patterns of repetition of the notes, and that's because they're multiples of those frequencies, right? So we talked about what Pythagoras did, that he took a string and he halved it, and he found two of the same notes at half the frequency each. Well, you can do go the other way, right? You can take a string and double it in length and end up with a frequency that's going to be twice as low, right? You're actually going lower by doing that. And that's really what the piano is, right? If you look at the strings of the piano, they're all different sizes, and they go from really long to really, really short. And they're all in a very specific dimensions to get those frequencies as discovered by Pythagoras. But of course, it's tied to what we can actually hear and what can actually be made to sound beautiful. There are pitches that are lower than the lowest A on the piano, but they're so muddy and hard to distinguish that they don't represent a musical kind of efficacy. And the same on the high end. You can theoretically hear pitches higher, but they tend to lose their musical efficacy because you can't even tell what pitch it is after a certain point. And by the way, that has implications for quantum uncertainty principle. Is actually this is a beautiful metaphor for the quantum uncertainty principle, and it's actually an idea called the musician's uncertainty principle, which is a classical interpretation of the quantum phenomena of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle.
Can you explain that, the quantum uncertainty principle? Can you give that to us in general terms that we would
understand? Yeah, just like at a very high level, right? What Heisenberg discovered, it's a beautiful discovery, and he basically said that if you know the momentum of a particle, you can't know its position, right? So if you know its p, you can't know its x. And if you know its x, you can't know its p. If you know its position, you can't know its momentum. If you know its momentum, you can't know its position. You can't know both at the same time. So there's this kind of mystery to particles in the universe, all particles at all times. And it's just this beautiful idea. And if you relate it to, and that's the reason why, by the way, that relates to the kind of expansion and contraction of quantum wave functions, right? When they're expanded and they're in probabilistic form, then, right, they're moving, right, through all space-time. And then when you actually measure it, you collapse it to a specific point. And that is, you now know its x, you now know its position, but you don't know how fast it's going and in what direction. So you can only know one at a time. Now with music, the metaphor for music, and it really works the same way, if you ever hear an orchestra tuning, right, what do? Well, they hold it for a long time, right? So they hold the note for a long time because then they can use that to pinpoint the accuracy of it. So essentially the kind of analogy is that momentum and position for a quantum particle are the same as frequency and time for music. And the momentum of a particle is kind of like its score, its musical notation through time. It's really a beautiful idea. Yeah. And
so is it, we can't, what came to my mind, I don't know if this is correct, is that if we can't hear it, we really don't know where it is. It could be high, it could be low, it could be at a frequency we just can't discern, right? And so even if I hear the C, it might be rippling out in frequencies that I simply don't hear, and I'm uncertain as to what those frequencies are. I don't know.
Think of it in terms of, think of it, Robert, in terms of rhythm, right? Or duration, right? So music is not just playing a frequency, but it's holding it for some duration. I could have a long note, or I could have a staccato. I could have a very short note. The shorter the note, the less sure I can be of its pitch, of its frequency.
Oh, fascinating.
I mean, I can go to the piano behind me, right, and hit a note really fast. And even if you have perfect pitch, you would have a hard time telling me what pitch it was. But if I were to have take my cello out and sustain a note for a minute, whether you had perfect pitch or not, you can certainly replicate the note, right? You can mimic it, you can replicate it, you can own it, you can be sure of the frequency that you're singing, right? You're like, I got the note.
Okay,
so
thank
that's
you.
The same idea, right? The momentum is our duration, all right, our kind of in time. It's a very similar idea.
And so it's 432 and 440. I don't know if this is conspiracy theory or not, but one, I've heard that, they, which is like, powers that be that we don't, have a name for, they sped up music from 432 to 440 to make it more unsettling and to kind of unsettle the human consciousness. And then one of them was that Hitler was involved in this. He wanted stuff to be played in 440. And then Hitler really liked Wagner. Wagner's really powerful, German stuff. But so I don't know if there's any truth to any of this, whether Hitler had any influence on how music was played. I know he won. It'd be nice if he got into art school. He might not have become a dictator. Right. But I don't know if he influenced music at all, and or if there was any like so in the Beatles or Led Zeppelin or stuff by Lady Gaga. Are they recording in 440, and could that be switched to 442? And would that make any difference? Would that be more naturally resonant with my ears and my physiology? Or is it just a matter of taste that, hey, it's a little bit more exciting up here and it's played up here and it's really not that big of an impact?
Well, Look, I think the impacts we're talking about, let's just establish some sense of kind of reference frame here. The differences we're talking about are really minute. Like, you would have to have an incredibly sharp auditory palate to be able to even hear the difference between them in isolation. So it's not that you're consciously, feeling or thinking that when you hear it, you hear a piece like, oh my God, that's the 432. I can't, you wouldn't really know. It would be some kind of more subtle, kind of unconscious impact that it would have on you. In the same way that DJs, right, they manipulate BPMs, yeah? So they manipulate BPMs to get you to, kind of feel a certain way, right? Because they're trying to manipulate your heartbeat, right, and your rhythms, your senses of rhythm. So in a similar way, the frequencies, whether it's 432 or 440, are doing that in some kind of subtle way as well. If the higher you go, it's definitely going to be more energetic by definition. And now how that translates to its impact is really going to vary from person to person, but sure, I can definitely see that. And this is the reason why the New York Philharmonic and many other orchestras do tune to higher frequencies, because it's going to project something a little more exciting, a little more a little more energizing. Now, let's go back to Verdi for a second. Look, what are they trying to do with opera, right? Operas, these are love stories, right? These are heartbreaking love stories, especially when, the arias are being sung and these beautiful sopranos and mezzo-sopranos are singing. Now, some people call 432 like the love frequency, right? And so when you think about that, well, if a soprano is in her sweet spot with the music, because it's at 432, she's going to be able to communicate something way more powerfully emotionally because of her instrument, her voice. Now you take her up to 440, 444, she's now more strained. Her singing is constricted, and her singing will have a different impact than if it was at 432. And I think that's why Verdi was so adamant about it. So that's something I think to keep in mind is those types of implications. I tend to look at kind of how do we think about it positively, right? In terms of, well, look, if we're trying to communicate something, like an opera is, that heartbreak, right? That melancholy, that hopefulness of love, whatever they're trying to communicate, right? Let's do it in a way that's going to maximize that, right? Which, for the human voice, which is an instrument, you must think of the physics of that instrument as well. So 432 would certainly benefit that. I don't think there's so much a conspiracy in the opposite direction, but certainly could have had an impact. And I don't think it's so, look, if you're trying to energize an audience and mobilize them, like historical people might have, then sure, you definitely would want to crank up the tuning a little bit. Yeah, I could see that. and like I said, orchestras today do that. And they were doing it well before, Hitler or any other leaders or anything like that, for sure.
Very, very cool. That's so informative. And so I'd love to understand how you, I know if you think about time travel and how you play your music, but I'd love to understand the models that you're using, because you're using healing. You're using music for healing, certainly at an emotional level, and also at a psychological, mental level, and perhaps even a spiritual level with your music. Do you think about? And I'm curious how if you're processing the music as you're playing it and flowing it and going into the deep minor chords to reach that sadness, or how do you process that? So I'd love a great understanding of how you do what you did last night, because it's just beautiful and phenomenal.
Well, thank you. I mean, one thing to keep in mind is that when I sit at the piano to do a mind travel experience, it is all improvised, and that's an important element to this part of the conversation. I think if you're playing a memorized piece, if I'm playing something from the classical literature, right, it's a different approach, it's a different impact. With this experience, it is really my own practice, right? That's where this all started. I would sit at the piano and I would use my relationship with the piano and with music to kind of express my feelings one note at a time, and I would develop these kind of soundscapes. Now, what I'm trying to do in that moment is kind of get myself out of the way, meaning my kind of analytical, intellectual self saying, okay, now I'm in this key, let me shift to that key, let me, and I'm trying to get out of that mindset into a state where it's about action and reaction, right? Kind of really embodying this kind of physics principle of action and reaction, right? Almost like I think it's what Newton's third law of motion or something like that. It's like this real kind of relationship with the physics of the instrument, right? Where you're inputting energy, right, through my physicality, through my body, right? And by the way, how you put that energy into the instrument is that first move is critical in terms of the sound production. So where it comes from, right? If it comes heavy from the arms and you're banging on the piano, you'll get one reaction from the instrument. If it comes more naturally, more organically from the center of the body, and it kind of more fluidly, you'll elicit a different reaction from the piano. These are all very subtle, but critical at the levels that we're playing at now. And so now the energy transfers, right, as potential energy to kinetic energy through my body into the keys. The keys, the movement of the key begins a mechanism, a very complex mechanism of thousands of moving parts inside the piano, which then hits the hammer, this felt hammer, which hits the string, which sets off the vibration. And then that string vibrates, oscillates back and forth, right, and potentially thousands of times per second, depending on where on the piano it is. And then we hear that, it moves the air molecules, right, around it, and that, kind of ripples out and hits our ears and translates that into music. Now, all that's happening in, of course, a split second, right? I mean, a sound is, those air molecules are traveling at, I don't know, something like 800 miles an hour to our ears, right, in our room. So it's extremely fast process, but it is a process you can break down that specifically, and way more specifically than I did. And then I have to play the next note already, right? Now I got to play the next note, right? So it is a very fast-moving cycle, a feedback loop that gets created. And when you're improvising, you have to kind of resign yourself to this deep listening state where, as opposed to imposing your will on the instrument, it becomes this kind of deep listening of the instrument to see what note would come next in its natural organic progression. So that's the framework of it. So then you start to build up this feedback loop, and just like a wave in the ocean, right, kind of moving through the water, you're kind of surfing on top. And that's the feeling of kind of improvising in music that I aspire to, where you're kind of sitting on top of that feedback loop wave. And of course, sometimes you might get kicked off, and then you kind of get back on, and hopefully the audience doesn't notice. I've gotten good enough where I could do that, but I know. but hopefully most of the time, you're just in that sweet spot, and it becomes effortless. And now in that effortlessness, I think that's the word, you would really discover what wants to be expressed. And there it's about unleashing the unconscious, the subconscious, and allowing it to rise to the surface. What am I talking about? Well, if we think about the mind, a very simple analogy, but an effective one, is to think of the mind like an iceberg, a floating iceberg in the ocean. You've got only about 10% of the ice, the top point is visible above the surface of the water. 90% of it is below the surface, unseen to to observers above the water. And the mind operates, I think, the same way, right? We're aware of what we're aware of, and that tends to be a small fraction of what we're unaware of, right? Of course, we have involuntary processes in the body, right? We're not controlling the action of our spleens and our kidneys. At least I'm not, but there's I mean, maybe some people have figured that out. I mean, by the way, have you seen like what David Blaine can do, right? With being able to control the muscles in his esophagus and stomach, right? That is actually imposing consciousness, awareness over muscles by training them, which are usually in that under the water part of the iceberg, right? He's kind of bringing above the surface some of that hidden element. That's actually, in my estimation, not actually magic. It's just incredibly beautiful training of the human mind and body connection. But in any case, we can do that through different practices. And this music is one that's a very powerful way to do that, because so much of what's happening beneath the surface of our minds, right, this hidden part of the iceberg of our subconscious, is emotional. And a lot of our emotional experience is suppressed or repressed. And we're just not conscious of it. We're just not aware of it. Now, when we gain certain levels of emotional literacy and we're able to express what we're feeling and our emotional states, right, we can unveil some of that, shed light on some of it. But it's an ongoing process, and music is a powerful way to do that, because music is the language of emotion, right? We say that there's a beautiful saying, when we lack the words, we turn to the poet, and when the poet lacks the words, she turns to the musician. And so music is a language just like any other language, but the difference is that the language of music is a multi-dimensional language, okay? It's a multi-dimensional language. What does that mean? Well, think about English, right? It's a linear language. You must put one word in front of the other, first one letter in front of the other, to put one word in front of the other, to create sentences, which then you put one sentence in front of one of the other, one paragraph in front of the other, and that's how we communicate, through writing or written, through spoken or written word. If more than one person were to do that at the same time, then it would be confusion. We would not understand anything. Now, let's now go to music. With music, yes, there is a linear dimension to it, right? Think of a beautiful oboe or a cello, playing one note at a time, one phrase at a time. It's just like one word or one sentence at a time. And truly, we think of it that way. And when we play, we think lyrically. We think as if we were speaking or singing the melody. But something else is happening in music, because when we put another instrument with that cello, and a third, and a fourth, each one of their melodies or phrasings or expressions actually constructs positively with the others. And instead of creating noise, it actually creates what we call harmony, right? Or polyphony is a better term for it. So
What is that? What is that word?
Polyphony, polyphonic music, meaning many voices, as opposed to monophonic, but polyphonic. And that's, when you think of polyphony, really think of the Baroque, think of Bach, right? Think of Vivaldi, think of Handel, think of these incredible composers that, I can play for you like a 4-part fugue, right? It's literally as if there were 4 people speaking at the same time or singing at the same time. And the 1 + 1 is not 2. It's infinite. Certainly 1 + 1 + 1 + 1. These 4 parts are so multidimensional, and because they're multidimensional, the permutations of expression are amplified exponentially. And that's the idea. So if you want to express a very difficult concept, it's a lot easier to do it through music than it is through words. And our emotions are incredibly complex communications, which is why we all have such a hard time with it, right? How hard is it to communicate what you're feeling? Especially guys, right? We kind of, we're like, oh, I'm just feeling whatever. like we can barely put words to it, okay? And yet we are feeling something, and it's usually quite tangled and intricate. And so music can lend some communication to untangle that. And that's truly what it's done for me. I mean, I've used music not only to express the joys of life, but I've used music to express the tragedies and the tribulations of life. Whether it's grief, where I used it to help in my own healing process from the death of my little sister and other friends, to just processing the stressors of life. And that's been the miracle of music for me in my life. And it's what other people have report to me in terms of their experience with, with the music that I share.
That's beautiful. Now, Murray, want to do a time check. We're the last talk for the evening. We're going to do a dinner break, and then we're going to come back on at 9 p.m. PST. Is it okay if we go over 5 or 10 minutes for you, or do you have something on the hour?
Yeah, I'm
Okay,
fine.
terrific. I wanted to ask you about Mozart versus Beethoven. So Mozart had this, and their mental models of music. So I listened to a lecture that said Beethoven is actually more revolutionary than Mozart, which kind of made me mad. I was like, that doesn't make sense at all. But as far as what he did with the piano, that he'd have to go to engineers, like, look, I'm going to bang on this thing. I'm going to hit it really, really hard, and I'm going to be like jumping on it. And you got to design me a piano where I can do this. I'm transforming the way the piano was played. And so he was revolutionary in that way. Whereas Mozart was more of a synthesizer, right? He traveled around Europe as a kid to all the courts. His dad took him to music all over the place, and he took it all to his mind. And then he could just spit it out with his own take and flavor on it, and play flow subconsciously like crazy. Whereas Beethoven was different. So I'd love your take on these two geniuses, on their kind of mental models on music and ways to understand them and appreciate them in different ways.
Yeah, and I'll tell you from playing both of them, I personally played the music of both of them, you walk away with a very different experience of a lens on the world, from playing their music. I will tell you that from the point of view of playing Mozart, and again, you can't divorce, just as you said, you can't divorce the music from the delivery of the music, meaning the instrument. So they did have different instruments, respectively. Just as Bach had a different instrument, and just as Chopin had a different instrument, and later, Rachmaninoff certainly had a different instrument, right? So all made piano music, right? All wrote keyboard music, but what you can do, for instance, on the harpsichord in Bach's case, right? Remember, Bach had no sustain pedal. Like, he could only play short notes. And he could, I'm talking about the keyboard, not on violins and other instruments, just keyboard music. So he could only play short notes. And if he held it down, it would decay pretty quickly. That was considered a long note, but it's a matter of seconds. And he had very little volume or dynamic variation at his disposal. You couldn't play it really loud or really, really soft. The dynamical, mechanical nature of the harpsichord limited you to a very narrow range. Now, I should mention a beautiful quote by Igor Stravinsky, the Russian composer, said that freedom is attained through limitations. And it's a wonderful piece of wisdom from music, that you create your constraints, right? Like, I'm only going to use these notes. I'm only going to use this instrument, right? And by creating your constraints, you can find freedom to create within those constraints. Okay, that's really what composers. That's like what we do. In the same way that probably artists, painters, sculptors do that too. But anyway, so Bach had his constraints. Mozart has had his constraints, but he also had kind of a way of seeing the world and a way of hearing the world. When you play Mozart's music, it opens up more transparently from Bach, right? Bach's music, some of the most incredibly intricate mathematical manifestation of music ever to have been created, period. Mozart comes along and creates this wonderful clarity to music, because his instrument now can distinguish between the left hand and the right hand, meaning I could now raise the melody above the accompaniment. And I could really make the accompaniment secondary to the melody, creating these multidimensional textures in the music. And you can hear that in almost every piece of Mozart's. And there's very little pedal in Mozart's piano music, if any. Again, coming from that tradition where he evolved from. He was right after Bach and the Baroque era, the beginning of the classical era. So you have this incredible clarity through his music. Something, in a way, people think it's childlike, but it's so sophisticated that it's this beautiful confluence of simplicity and sophistication. That's how I would describe Mozart's way of hearing the universe. And when you get to Beethoven, now the beginning of the Romantic period, so the next kind of generation of music, the piano evolved. It became, the mechanics of it became hardier, more robust, bigger, louder. And so he was able to do more, right, with the instrument, with the vehicle of delivery. It's kind of like the medium is the message, you know. What was it, Marshall McLuhan or something like that. So you have to really understand the instruments of the time to appreciate the musicality that they were able to compose for it. And the work of Beethoven has that intensity to it because he was able to take advantage of it. And by the way, if you go just subsequent to Beethoven, to Chopin, who is the master of all masters of the piano, he definitively evolved what the piano can do through his work. You're now going up and down the keyboard in a way that no pianist or composer had ever done. And so he took it to a whole different level. And then you get to Rachmaninoff, and now the piano is pretty much what we have today. And you're creating, you know, through Liszt and Rachmaninoff, you're creating music that is as loud, as powerful as any orchestra. So, you know, that evolution over time really, they were based on different physical capabilities, the evolution of technique, but also being able to constantly think bigger and more broadly because of all these interacting elements that was around them.
And so I'm curious how you feel. You said you'll play Mozart on the piano and you'll feel differently than you'll play Beethoven on the piano. Can you describe what that's like? Like how does it feel after playing a Mozart piece versus playing a Beethoven piece?
Yeah, I think for Mozart, for me, I'm able to get into this kind of I think of it as almost a beautifully still lake where the colors, the light, I could pristinely distinguish between all these elements because you can hear them all. They're transparent, right? That's what I mean by the transparency of his music. It's almost like seeing into his mind. You can actually hear what he's doing in the music. And that's a beautiful thing. A lot of music is obfuscated. I mean, as magnificent as Bach is, it's very difficult to listen to all of it at the same time because there's so much of it going on at the same time, right? I mean, I would challenge anyone to actually hear all 4 or let alone 5 parts of a fugue at the same time. Like, you have to listen to it over and over, and then each time you follow a different path in the forest, you know? It's just really hard to do. And I don't even know if you'd want to do it because it's a delight to be able to follow each different path at different times. With Beethoven, you know, and I think also we have to factor in their own lives and emotional states. You can't deny that influence, right? Beethoven was a tortured individual. He was a tortured individual on many levels. And so that manifests itself in the music. You can't not walk away and feel the torment, the melancholy, the power, it's in the music directly. And when you play it, you know, I mean, you know, many people, for instance, play the Moonlight Sonata, and, you know, that slow movement is so heartbreaking. But it's very complex. It's very complicated. It has lots of different layers to it, several happening at the same time. So again, you can find simplicity in Beethoven, but the loaded emotional content is very, very high, even in the simpler pieces, quote unquote, simpler pieces of Beethoven. Yeah. And Chopin, I mean, Schumann, Chopin, these guys were physically frail. They all died young, in their 30s, late 30s. You know, they got sick and died. They had mental issues. They were in asylums. I mean, this is real, you know, mental illness and physical illness that struck them. So how could that not manifest in their music?
Didn't Bach live for a really long time and have like a pile of kids? He had like 10 or 12.
Bach is the opposite of these guys, okay? Bach lived to, I believe, close to 80. Again, this is he was born, I think, 1685 to 1750, something like that. You know, he lived a long time. And, you know, he had several wives and about 20 kids, I believe 10 of which survived. So, you know, he played the odds, and I think he won. He did well.
I heard music was so scarce then that he had to like his uncle was into music. He had to like steal the sheets and transcribe them like during lunch breaks, or like steal the sheets and transcribe them, which was a crime at the time. But that's how you would get music. You had to steal it and then like copy it and then like try to put it back, right? That was how valuable those sheets of music are. And now we can print up we can print up a symphony just from our printer for like free. And I'm like, what on earth is this worth like 200 years ago? Like this is hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. And someone who's very skilled and very detail oriented, like, you hope you don't drop a couple notes.
Yeah, there were people whose job that was. I mean, absolutely. And if you think about the value of that, back then, remember, there's no recorded music, right? So if you want to hear music, right, you have one of two options, right? You either go to the theater or the church, or you have to play the music yourself or a member of your family at home. And that's why pretty much everyone grew up learning to play an instrument, and that's where the whole idea of chamber music came from. Chamber coming from the French word chambre, room, so it's music that was played in the living room. And you had a violinist, you had a cellist, you had a violist, a pianist, and that's why these composers all made, duos, trios, quartets, quintets, so that families and friends can play together, because that was entertainment. That's how you pass the time.
What do you think Mozart would do today with Spotify? So you give him free access to most of the music that's ever been written and recorded in pretty high fidelity. What on earth does someone like that do with something like Spotify?
God knows what his genius would have manifested in this day and age, with the technology and the expression that we have. It's just miraculous. Or maybe he would have just been like, oh my God, this is too much. I'm going to take up a new career.
I wonder if he'd be really into like disco. He's like, this, it's just,
something tells me he'd be a master remixer of fusing so many different, things together because of the capacity that he had.
Yeah, I kind of view the composer John Williams as someone who's really interesting to look at, because in the past, Leonardo da Vinci was, he was an artist, but he also did set design for plays, and most of this art is lost. If you read Walter Isaacson's book Leonardo, he talks about how he went to Milan, not only built weapons of war, but he built sets, and these sets to create effects where people could fly, you'd be on the ocean, things would come apart and move, and that was like being in the movie industry, right? That was being in the technology industry. And then, you had, at the time of Mozart, you had people writing operas, and that was like being in the movies, right? Operas where you would go to see your performance. And so being the opposite of being in the movies. And now today, that's kind of like being a composer for movies like John Williams. And John Williams has touched hundreds of millions of people with his scores in these movies like Star Wars and E.T. I was listening to Beethoven, it was the fifth, and I heard some riffs from E.T. And I was like, I was at Burning Man, and I nudged someone. It's like, I think Beethoven borrowed this from John Williams and E.T. This sounds pretty familiar.
No, absolutely. The opera of today is film, and it's storytelling. Ultimately, all music is storytelling, and that's the ultimate mental model for music, right? I mean, I approach every mind travel as a storytelling experience, albeit an abstract, subconscious storytelling. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to express what's repressed and deep within me. I'm trying to expose it in a vulnerable, open, and transparent way to heal myself, and through that process, hopefully others are on the same train.
That's fabulous. We have some questions here. I'd love to get to those.
Yeah, sure.
So CK Lynn asks, CK is a great mental modeler. Hey, CK, can you talk about the learning journey from learning the mechanics to standing out of the way of the music? So,
right. Yeah. I think to tackle that, it's important to really get that expressing yourself through music is not something that's only a mental exercise, but and not just a mechanical one, but more so, it is a fully somatically embodied one. So, if you were to play, a Chopin etude, some of the most difficult pieces for the repertoire, right? You can't play it mentally. You just, I mean, you just can't. You just can't play it mentally. You have to kind of ease yourself into it after practicing it so many times for so long that the mechanics and the movement of it are truly one in your brain between your body, your muscle memory, and your neural memory. They have to be so fused and in sync together that one is a direct expression of the other. So getting out of the way in that case would be, oh, I hope I don't make a mistake on that section. God, that section is really tricky for me. I hope I kind of, oh, should I slow down there? Should I get a little faster on that section? Do I retard here? Do I accelerando there? Like, you know, that's getting out of, you know, that's getting in the way. So the mental side to this is how to keep the chatter to a minimum. So playing music at this level is a true exercise in presence. It's a true exercise in the present moment, because any tense that you're in, meaning past or future, outside of the present moment, will truly mess you up. It'll kick your ass. It'll mess you up. Especially with something like Bach, I would say, because there's no way to keep track of 4 voices at the same time, even with the muscle memory, if you're not hyper present in each moment of that. So it's this paradoxical kind of hyper focus attention with a simultaneous letting go. And I know that probably sounds nuts, but that's really what it is. It's a full surrender into it, and a sense of presence. What the kind of thing people talk about now a lot in terms of the feeling that sense of flow. It is truly embodied in playing music right at that level, because any distraction or anything that's pulling you in any direction will just take you off the surfboard. You know, Keith Jarrett, the famous pianist and jazz musician, he's infamous for if there's any noise in the audience, he will not start playing. If anybody takes out a phone to take a picture, he will, if he sees a flash, and I've been to concerts and I've seen him do this, he will have the security guard go to the seat, find the person, and take the phone or kick them out. I mean, I've seen it happen. So, you know, it's about how to maintain that hyper kind of focus in that zone. And there's certain things that I do to get there in my improvisations through certain patterning in the music that actually the brain, I believe, likes. There's certain patterns the brain likes. Just kind of, I'll give you one final mental model, right, which is the brain seems to respond, this is for all of us, not just when you're playing music, but the brain really responds well to this beautiful balance, walking the fence, walking the line between predictability and novelty. So if you look at music, right, the brain is constantly, I mean, it's just relentlessly trying to figure out what's next. It's trying to anticipate the next note, the next phrase, the next harmony, the end of the piece. So as a composer, right, your job is to keep the audience kind of right there with you by giving them something predictable enough to maintain their interest, not too predictable that they lose interest, and then novel enough that excites and surprises them, but not too novel that it is disconnected. Does that make sense? That's the art of composing. That's the art of truly anything. It's the art of storytelling. It's the art of movie making. It's the art of everything. It's the art of living, right? Don't we all want predictability in our relationships, right? In our lives? Look at what's happening in the world right now. We certainly crave predictability. But when things are too predictable, we get complacent, we get bored. We then look for something. We have to take a trip. We have to go skydiving. We have to do something crazy to mix it up, right? Now, if things are too unpredictable, too novel, too uncertain, well, look where we are now. We don't seem to like that either.
So when you learn, do you go through the mechanical process and all the way to flow when you learn? or you strive to be in flow as you're acquiring that piece or skill? What's your mental model around that?
Well, I don't know of any conservatories that are teaching flow in the sensibility that we're talking about here. It's something that you either achieve, figure out on your own, or you don't. Look, there are many musicians that train for years, just like there's many lawyers that go to law school and don't become professional lawyers. There's many people, I mean, many that go through the training and they can't sustain the mental capacity to perform at this scale, at this level, because they can't get out of their own way, whether it's the anxiety, whether it's the pressure, whether it's the fear. Those human elements, whether you're a pianist or whether you're speaking on stage, you know, as a CEO or whatever it is, those human elements are still present, right? You're still a human being getting up there and playing, right? I mean, unless you're Evgeny Kissin or someone like that that's just like superhuman and can just, you know, power through it. But by the way, someone like Evgeny Kissin, I mean, he is on the autistic spectrum, and so some of his ways of processing social anxiety are different. Some of his senses of fear are different. I think he actually is able to focus in a hyper-focused way because of, right, some of his mental state. So it works to his advantage in that case, in respect to the piano, right? Maybe not in other areas of his life. So I think it's something that each person has to reconcile for themselves, but it's true for no matter what we do. The piano or any instrument is just a hyper setting that exposes you one way or the other. There's no faking it, right? You can't fake it. So, you know, you're either in the zone or you're not, and people will know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Z. Yes, please.
I enjoyed this so much. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
I also loved how much you used physics metaphors. By the way, I teach physics, and I also play guitar a little bit. I harmonize with my wife all the time. We love that. So I was going to tell you, I think you will really enjoy this. With your permission, Robert, can I share a screen that with a piece of physics that Murray was talking about, which is actually more formal than you actually probably realize?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, let me make you co-host, and then you should have the power to do that.
All right.
Okay, go.
So as you were speaking, hold on. What did I share? I think I shared the wrong screen. Hold on. Just one tiny second, please. Okay, so this is from the textbook, physics textbook that I'm teaching. Can you see this?
Yes.
So it's explaining why you were saying, you know, how musicians, when they're tuning their instruments up, they have to do these long tones. And I did not occur to me that this is what they do. When you have only a short pulse, you know, you can imagine this as only one wavelength. And then these uncertainties around the edges are problematic because you have large uncertainty and only small distance.
Yes.
But when you have a long wave, those edges are equally uncertain. But this uncertainty is then divided by the number of wavelengths that are introduced there. So
exactly.
it's very, you know, it's actually, you know, and then they go to frequency time, right? Now they turn the wavelength into frequency, and here's the expression that you were talking about. I mean, right here, frequency and time, and the level of uncertainty that you have. And this is for classical waves. You were drawing the analogy with Heisenberg's uncertainty.
Yes.
And this is actually introduction to Heisenberg's uncertainty in the.
Is that right?
Yeah. This is introduction to Heisenberg. See next chapter.
Oh, there you go.
So they're first showing you this in the classical setting before moving on to a quantum mechanical one. So that was one beautiful thing. The other one, you were talking about the constraints. You might have known that when they did experiments with children, and they would give them a specific area to play in, and if this area was constrained, then the children would explore every part of it. But when they would just tell them, like, walk in the park and, you know, explore, they would stay in a much smaller area if they did not know what the boundaries are.
Right.
And then finally, when you were talking about certainty and uncertainty, Robert was earlier in his model talking about Tony Robbins' model of 6 knees. Those are the first two: certainty and uncertainty, how they correspond to one another. You explained that beautifully. You were talking about third Newton's law. Just fascinating. I truly enjoyed it. I thought I would show you this because it was feeding.
No, that's absolutely spot on. And it's very difficult, as I'm sure you fully appreciate, as someone who teaches physics, right? You fully appreciate that so many of the laws of nature and the ways nature works are inaccessible to us because they're so far out there, right? I mean, again, once you get past the classical realm, right? Once we get past Newtonian mechanics and we get into, special relativity, general relativity, it's very hard for most people to grasp this stuff. I mean, special relativity, to be able to conceive of time dilation, to be able to conceive of, of synchronicity. I mean, it's very, very challenging, let alone lathe contraction. I mean, it's a total mind-blowing concept.
And most amazing thing to me is that you start with very simple premises. And then you build very logically. Because when I explain this to students, every next step is logical. And then 10 steps down the line, you're in this nowhere land, and you have no clue. You're like, how in the world did I come to this nowhere space? Every step was logical.
Yeah.
And then you're suddenly, same thing with quantum mechanics, right?
Yes.
You follow some logic and then you're suddenly in this nowhere land. So absolutely, yes, you're right on that too.
There's, metaphorically, again, I try to create access to some of these ideas, right? Take time dilation, for example, right? And for those listening, right, this idea that the way the clock ticks off for different people in different frames depends on their speed. In relation to the speed of light. So the faster you move towards the speed of light in terms of speed, the slower your clock will run compared to a stationary observer. So that's the kind of basic concept, but we can never really have access or grasp that because we can never travel at any meaningful fraction of the speed of light to actually see that effect. Now, we have done experiments, right? Decades ago, they put those two atomic clocks, right? One on the plane and one on the ground, and they measured it. And even, again, the imperceptible fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a second, that was the difference between a clock moving at about 500 miles an hour versus a stationary clock. Right. So they did prove it, but again, not meaningfully perceptible, right? So at the piano, right, what I'll do is I'll make believe my hands are two different observer or reference frames. And I'll have one of them, right, moving at a certain speed, and then the other one's in sync with it because they're in the same reference frame. But then look what happens.
Oh, my goodness.
So one of them starts to kind of split off into their own reference frame because they're traveling at a different speed. Time is ticking off, so their tempo, their rhythm, their pulse is different for them. And I play with patterns like that in my music. And now, and that's how I access these concepts. Of course, I'm not literally doing time dilation. It's just a representation of it. But that's the idea. Yeah.
And you're basically creating the third entity there with beats.
Yes.
So you're really truly creating third entity.
Yeah.
I mean, all of these metaphors that you're using, the model that I was earlier presenting is about physics laws as being used as models for life situations. Even spiritual lessons. One point I hope I'll have a chance to show it to you. But all of these third Newton's law, action and reaction. You were actually saying you're using it as the metaphor for the cause and effect.
Yes.
Right. If I do this, then piano does that. Right. It's a beautiful metaphor for cause and effect. The frequency has so many beautiful metaphors because waves reflect back to us. The frequency depends on a heartbeat, and so on and so on. And I'm amazed how well you so beautifully, eloquently explained the time dilation in 2 minutes. I just enjoyed listening to you.
Thank you. Robert, should we continue, or do you have other questions? I can keep going on the physics stuff.
CK is still here. CK had another question about the torment necessary to create greatness. A lot of artists have struggled and suffered. CK, if you want to ask your
Yeah,
questions.
let me elaborate on that a little bit. If I look at acting as a metaphor, there are method actors, right? They look at the role, really study and dive into it, and from that space express themselves, living in that space. For you as a musician, as a creator, when you create music, do you put yourself in a particular mental state, or you literally, as you said earlier, remove yourself and just allow music in the singular moments flowing through you? And if you were to do that, how do you do that
Yeah.
for you? Yeah.
So I think if you were to have asked my younger self this question, my younger self, certainly in my teens and 20s and early 30s, would have responded like, for sure. Like, the more tormented you are, the more charged and impactful the music would be. And there's more sources of inspiration, right? Through, through tragedy, through heartbreak, right? Through pain. I think answering that question today, I would have a very different response. And while I certainly can appreciate finding inspiration in those life emotional states and life happenings, number one, I believe I've come to a place where I can reference those times in my life without having to be experiencing it in this time. Now, that takes an extraordinary amount of connection with what you were going through and what you were feeling. And in order to have that, it's best if, as you were going through it, you were really conscious of it and aware of it, so that you can actually kind of code it, in a sense, and understand it from that point of view. So
Sorry,
you
you
can
lost
access it.
me. Can you back up a couple of sentences, please? Can you just
Yeah.
say it in a different way?
Yes, of course. So when I look for sources of inspiration, right, I could look back in the same way that an actor, right? It's a lot of actors. You use the example of acting. A lot of actors, I believe, they look and they source moments in their life where they could replicate that feeling and bring it into the present moment on stage. Yeah. They don't have to necessarily be feeling that right now authentically in their life outside the stage to be able to represent it on stage. That's a good actor, yeah? So in the same way, as a composer, I can look back at times in my life, at memories that were difficult, at times that were challenging, at grief, at heartbreak, at physical pain, at emotional pain, at spiritual desperation and despair. I can look at all of that. And I could draw on it. I could draw on it. I could tap that. I could source it. I could use it as inspiration, and I could channel it right now in this moment. Now, I'm not saying everyone can do that, but it's something that I've really worked on being able to do. Now, in terms of kind of the other side of it, I believe there's even more inspiration if you can get a glimpse of the infinite nature of the universe and the ecstatic experience of this whole game. There's more energy for inspiration in one drop of that than all the pain of humanity. And I'm not saying it sounds joyous, by the way, because I believe to truly understand the complete picture of the universe, it's like matter and antimatter. Like, you just have to understand both to understand the conception of the universe, right? It's not all positive, and it's not all negative, right? It's actually just this much more positive than negative, and that's why we're here. That's just technically why we're here. But I believe that psychologically and emotionally and existentially, right? That we think about life in this bittersweet way, right? Why is it that when people go through tragedy, do they have some of the largest and most powerful breakthroughs in their life purpose? In some cases, they wouldn't have achieved those breakthroughs in their life if they didn't go through that tragedy. Well, the two are tied together. Our sense of being of service, our sense of purpose, our joy can only exist in relative experience to our pain. So one informs the other. One informs the other. They don't exist in isolation. And that produces a much larger variation of experience. So if I only know pain, if I'm always depressed, I only have half the picture. I mean, I'm being crude, right? Very, very rough, but I only have part of the expression. But the depression, the difficulty, the challenge, the despair, the pain, coupled in opposition and in relationship with the ecstasy, the joy, right? The awe. I mean, if I had to listen to music without awe, joy, wonder, surprise, that's not music to me. And music to me is also music without sadness and contemplation and all of that. That wouldn't be music to me either. I need both because the human experience is both. It is bittersweet. And how could you express the awe and the grandeur of the universe without having a taste of it if you're just stuck in your tragedy, in your personal story? How could you? I don't know. I don't know how you could.
Right.
What strikes me about this is that my favorite Mozart is the 40th Symphony, followed by the 41st. He wrote those in one summer, along with the 39th. It's called the Summer of Mozart. And this was the summer his daughter died. And children and being a father for him was nothing but sadness. He lost a bunch of children during childbirth. He was just grateful his wife didn't die during childbirth. And so his daughter dies. And then he locks himself up in his room for 3 months and writes amazing symphonies. 2 of them are some of the greatest symphonies ever written. And if the 4th is his only symphony in a minor key. And would he have gotten there? Would he have gotten to that depth without the sadness of losing another child and all those things happening? Probably not. And yet he found a way to transmute that into such beauty.
CK, I'll follow that up with, that's beautiful, Robert. CK, I'll follow that up by saying, for me personally, I'll share a personal anecdote. I mean, for me personally, while I certainly, felt a lot of those things when I was younger, it wasn't really until my little sister died at the age of 20. She was 23. I was in my 30s, and it was sudden and tragic and just horrific. And I was with her during the accident. So there was a tremendous amount of grief and trauma associated with it. And it's not like that's what informed my pain, which translated into the music. But what that did was that experience actually cracked me open and allowed me to express what I wasn't willing to express prior. And I think that's a key element to this, right? What makes a good actor is not that they feel things differently than every other human being. It's actually that they have some incredible ability, some genius for translating that and communicating that for us so we feel it. And it takes them being vulnerable and open to do that. And it's no different at the piano, right? If when I sit down, it's like how open, transparent, and vulnerable can I be? And if I'm in any way kind of closed off and protective, and I hope I look good, and I hope I impress people, and all that stuff, I don't think I'll translate or communicate my storytelling as effectively. And I think prior to that tragedy, I was more in that space, and I certainly, by the way, wasn't performing as much. And since then, I mean, I perform 200 dates a year. So it's a different world.
It's a great, hey, who's this guy? He's been hiding behind the dark screen the whole time. I'm still trying to get from 0 to 1. But no, your analogy for the actors is really good. I mean, it's really accurate in the sense that, what the actors do is, like you said, it's no different than everybody else, but they're willing to do it basically publicly or on camera. The best actors are not acting, I'm freaking out. They're freaking out. They're not acting that I'm sad. They're just going there and doing it in a way that, and it is very liberating. And you see, because most people aren't able to do that, you know, and expose that. And as a director, like when you're working with actors that are at that caliber, it's so much less about like trying to do anything to them except create an environment where they feel safe enough to do that. If you create the environment where they're like, I trust that I can do my thing, like you're done, your job is done. Anyway, just awesome stuff, guys. I just want to say, as a musical novice, I've learned so much on this particular presentation.
That's it. You've absorbed and taken all my knowledge. I'm now completely useless to you.
Maury, actually, I have a follow-up question with you about that
Yeah.
journey of you becoming more open since your sister's unfortunate death, right? You say you practice a lot, so consistency is a thing that you learn to open up. Is there anything else that you do as a way to open yourself up more and alleviate the untruth of you, the inauthenticity, such that you can step into more and more amore and then use this magnificent instrument that you have to amplify who you are to the rest of the world?
You know, I would say what's the thought that's occurring for me right now is that vulnerability is a muscle. And like any other muscle, you have to exercise it and you have to use it. Otherwise, it atrophies and it just doesn't gain strength. So vulnerability is no different. And it's about even the micro vulnerabilities, right? Of just doing the small things to share yourself in your everyday life with those in your life. You know, that's really where this all begins. And when someone feels closer to you, it's because of those small and large vulnerabilities. That's how we feel closer to each other. It's kind of crazy, right? Like, you know, we're all trying to impress each other and we're all trying to look good and we're all trying to be, you know, super special and impress people. And yet it turns out that none of that stuff is what draws us closer to people. Maybe initially, you know, maybe from a distance, you know, you like, because you just kind of see the shininess of it maybe, and you kind of, but then when it gets closer, you lose interest. It's the vulnerability, because it's through the vulnerabilities that there's relation, that people can relate to you. Why? Because they have the same issues, right? So that's what we're talking about here. How do we create deeper connection? How do we create, you know, deeper relationship? And ultimately, right, that's creating more unity, and unity is the synonym for love. Unity is love. Thinking of love in the abstract is difficult, but you can think of it very concretely, right? It's union, it's unity. It's creating more union. That's love. That's the expression and manifestation of love. So to the extent you're trying to get more love in your life, and who isn't, then the more vulnerability that you express will create more intimacy. The more intimacy will create more relationship, which creates more union or unity, which creates more love.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Who else has a question for Murray? This is a amazing dialogue conversation that we're having here.
I have a question. I've never seen this happen, and you've kind of described about how you go into your own zone. It sounds like you've kind of answered it in the sense of like you go into this zone of service, which I totally get. But my question is, you've also been, I mean, you guys don't know this, but I'm just following on kind of social, you know, email, whatever. Murray plays a lot. He does a lot of shows. You've done a lot, like consistently over the last few years. You know. So my question is, what do you do on that once in a while blue moon show when you're not feeling it, when you're like just, you know, damn, I mean, like I'm just really, and you don't want to dial it in, but you're also like, I'm honestly like, I can't tell them, but I am not feeling the what I usually do. How do you deal with that?
So Jonathan, 3 years ago, I have my first huge date in Central Park, New York. Okay, outdoor concert, my grand piano in the middle of the field. I mean, you know, 1,000+ people waiting. And I wake up that morning with diarrhea and a stomach ache. And feeling like, I mean, I just had no energy. Like, you know, I mean, we've all been, you know, some kind of, you know, stomach bug that just crushed me. And there was no way I was not getting out there. But if I did, I knew my energy would be just horrendous. I mean, it's just, I mean, you can't fake it. Like, it's just hard. And yet I just showed up and I just, you know, kind of had a little chicken broth and a little just hydrated throughout the day. I just prayed for the best. And when I got out there, I really just did I did my simple practice of breathing, of getting into that zone space through those first notes. And I gave the performance of a lifetime. Wow. And I was empty I was almost lighter. And the mind can quickly take over the failings of the body and the weaknesses of the body, at least temporarily, right? Adrenaline does a wonderful job at keeping us together for some period of time to survive a threat, right? That's why we have adrenaline, right? These hormones. So we can run away from the lion really quickly, but we can't do it forever, but we can do it for some number of minutes, right? So it was enough for me to do my concert. I mention that because it's important to still show up. And when you do, you know, when you're doing stuff professionally, right, you have to show up. That's the mark of a professional. You just got to show up and do it. Now, in most cases, by the way, the audience maybe wouldn't have even known that I wasn't feeling well or whatever. But I know, and you know, and that's the most important thing. And so, you know, I have a kind of a funny thing. When I sit down, I always start playing the improvisation. And for those that have listened to different, you know, experiences and concerts and recordings, I usually always start with just playing one note, almost like kind of the bell at the beginning of a Zen meditation, you know, just to use that one note to kind of clear the space, to kind of create a fresh canvas. And for me, that one note can actually anchor my mind into that flow state. Because it's that anchoring that we need. And I literally follow the ripples of that one note, I mean, just eternally. And now I'm in this kind of timeless state. And then the patterns begin, and I trance myself through the music. And that's the process that I go through. And I know certain techniques like that, like certain patterns that I could come to if I get really distracted. You know, I mean, I can think of times when, you know, a pin drop quiet theater and a kid starts crying in the third row, right? I mean, that'll take you right out of it. If that doesn't take you out of it, nothing will. Yet, you just have to, you know, action, reaction, right? We control our state. Our state is not control. I mean, the outside doesn't control us. We control it from the inside. So it's my choice of how I react. I don't have to react to that disturbance, right? I could continue to maintain, but I need a practice to do that. I need that muscle to be strong to do that.
Ray, do you remember the date of that Central Park concert where you had diarrhea and you became superhuman and gave the performance of your life?
I think it was June 3 years ago. So 17, June of 17.
Okay, I'm trying to remember amazing feats by other humans and then put those on my calendar so I can be inspired by them. I'm totally gonna use
maybe
this
use a different word than
inspire
diarrhea
me if I'm not feeling good. But what should we say? Sick, tired, not the top of his game.
Yeah, you can say I had a stomach bug or something. You can say diarrhea too. I don't care.
Is it available in recording somewhere? That particular one?
It must be. It must be. I can check. I
would love to hear it.
Yeah.
Oh, do you have access to some of your other time travel recordings, Murray? Is it possible to get access to? Oh, by the way, I want you to know, Murray took some of his music and created a synergy of it for Friday night to go specifically with the art. So in the Mystic Theater, in the Mystic Verse, and in the Infinite Playa is going to be Murray's time travel music specifically for the art in camp. So if you just want to listen to it, it'll be amazing. If you want to listen to it with the art, it'll be
Yeah, there's actually a piece I put on there which was premiered last year and a half ago in Los Angeles. And it's a piece for an infinite number of clarinets. And basically, it features 4 soloists and an electronic track of like just a huge number of stacked clarinets, electronically recorded. So it's that piece will be on there. It's a magnificent piece. I'm very proud of it, and other pieces, lots of other pieces as well. That if you really are in the state of profound listening and connecting with the artwork, and if possibly there's some other influence in your brain, you'll really go somewhere quite special.
Oh, fabulous! So that's Friday evening after the transformational talk.
Yeah.
So the same
Dr.
link.
Z, did you have a question?
So that the same link that we are now on Friday evening.
Yes, I would recommend going into the Mystic Verse or Infinite Playa. It'll be playing there too. And so you want to be in the physical digital space so you can look at the art on the walls and hear the music. And if you want the music, if it's not high def coming through the Mystic Verse, log into here. It'll be playing on here as well.
Okay. Thank you.
So yeah, this link, but I'd recommend going into the multiverse and then looking at the art while it's playing, because that's what Murray created.
Yep.
This
Is there
is
any other
amazing.
questions, Robert, that people had?
I'm looking through here in the chat. CK, did you have anything else you wanted to ask? By the way, CK and Dr. Z are two mental model experts. And today has been about mental models, and two really wonderful thinkers. It's great to have them on here at the end of the day, thinking and sharing and discussing.
I mean, I could talk to you for hours. Well, I just wanted to say I really could.
Likewise.
The number of things that you touch upon: creativity, flow, learning, self-expression, speaking your truth, all of these things, and also learning from the life strategy, the more meta, type of stuff. Again, talk to you for hours. Love to have a podcast conversation with you, but let's not do that right now until later. I wanted just to take a moment to thank you for sharing so generously who you are, your gift, your talents, your blessings, and your experience. It's palpable for me. I don't know, but for the rest of the people, it's palpable that you're really here to just be so generous and share who you really are with the rest of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Very much appreciated. I do love sharing my music and the ideas behind it, right? Because ultimately that all gets communicated. Whether I specifically state the ideas, I'm hoping to communicate these ideas through the music at the same time.
I just want to give Murray a shout out as being the mystic with the most vision. He was literally the first person to sign up on the, when Mystic was first saying, hey, we're going to do something. We don't know what it is yet, but if you want to participate, do it. And I give you the most credit for believing in what all this means and being open to sharing everything that you do. So thank you.
Thank you. And to think of the memories we have of being on the playa and putting all my crazy piano gear in the magic Mystic bus and dropping me off at the temple in sandstorms. I mean, just incredible life memories.
If if no one's seen you out there fighting the elements like some sort of Looney Tunes image,
yep.
It is really something. It's really
Mad,
something.
Mad Max meets classical pianist.
Thank God for silent disco headphones.
Yep.
C-Rex's persistence is one of the reasons why you hear Murray. Every time I talk about the speaker series, every time I talk to C-Rex, did you call Murray? Did you call Murray? Did you call Murray yet? Fucking call Murray right now, Sky. I'm so tired. Like seriously, he was so persistent that I get in touch with you to get you on the schedule for the speaker series when I took over. And then when we talked, it's like, man, this is really fun. We got to do more of this. But it's C-Rex's persistence to be like, dude, if you got to take over the speaker series, this is your first call. I don't care about anything else. Get him on the schedule. He wants to play. He wants to perform. He wants to talk. And then you can talk to everybody else. And he's laughing right now because this is
awesome.
We had minimum 3-time conversation. We had this, and great determination. It was done.
And the funny thing was that, Robert, you had attended through another friend, mutual friend of ours, one of my big performances in Denver.
Another
years
Mystic.
ago. It was a total coincidence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fabulous. Dr. Z, you were going to say something. I cut you off.
I was just going to echo what CK was saying earlier, honestly. And the way you were sharing about being authentic and vulnerable, I think I think today is the next chapter in my life after hearing you saying that. I don't
Wow.
know, something clicked. Something clicked.
Thank you. We're all teachers for each other, and really beautiful. And that's the that's the ultimate entanglement of humanity. Yeah.
This
Love it.
is what I
Love it.
describe as the cyber mystic megabits burn barrel. We're just kind of sitting around sharing wisdom.
Yep. No, and that's the thing, right? It's like when we come together, like I can't have this conversation in isolation, right, or in a vacuum, right? Ideas are amplified in togetherness, in community, right? There's things we can come up with collectively that would be way more challenging to come up with in isolation and in separateness.
Thanks so much.
Absolutely. And so
Again,
for the
collaboration and action.
Collaboration and action, absolutely. Yeah.
for those of you who weren't here the entire time, I'd love to run through my notes really quickly just to review them so we could remember some of the great things we talked about. And then Murph, if there's anything you want to share before we take off, or if this inspires another question. So we talked about the universe as music, right? The universe is composed of music and vibration. Something as simple as this rock is composed of vibration at the atomic level, but also the concept that if you rewind creation and play it over and over again, this rock might be different. And so the idea that physical matter is static, music is always moving, but physical matter is static. That's not really true. Physical matter is also moving in a couple different paradigms.
Thinking of physical matter as events, as inanimate objects as an event, will then translate it in your mind as music, as an event in time. And it just happens to be a really long-lasting event in time, or a really long-lasting musical piece. If you just take that one thing away from this conversation and look at the world, at all the things that seem static as events in time unfolding beautifully, your whole world will change. Because it's true for the person next to you, because we think that the person next to us is static and that they're unchanging, yet they are an event in time. They're not a thing. They're not just a body. They're an event expressing themselves in time, beautifully and musically. Sorry, I just had to say that.
No, it's perfect. That's exactly what we are, events in time. I'm going to drill that in my head. I'm going to say it to someone tonight. Be like, hey, you're event in time. I'm not going to make you static. You're totally moving here.
That's right.
Music is an outpouring of mathematics, and we turn sound, vibration, math into sound, into music. Music is not a naturally occurring thing. It is our interpretation in our psyche, in our mind, of these sounds, of these frequencies, and we're putting together. And most of the frequencies and sounds in the universe we actually don't hear. And it's fascinating that there's so much music around us that we're not even aware of. So music is a miracle of the brain. We talked about the harmonic series and Pythagoras and how he played notes by taking a string, cutting it in half and cutting it in half and cutting it in half. And this is the meditation, the music meditation. It's counting to one and counting to one in the smallest denomination possible. And so you'd go like 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1. You keep on going with all the point 0, 0, 0, 0 to try to get the smallest denomination to move forward. And you can never move forward because you keep on getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So as the string gets longer, it gets smaller. So it's a really cool meditation. And then you use the term eruptive enlightenment, this sudden realization where it just erupts enlightenment. Major chords versus minor chords are minor chords generally have kind of sad emotions associated with the. Major chords kind of more happy and upbeat. Are those innate or are those programmed? We don't really know, because most of the times we hear minor chords with someone else, they are showing sadness, so we kind of associate that with them. But the meaning of
Robert, I just want to add one thing to that.
Yeah, please.
Which just occurred to me. I didn't think of it earlier. Is that
Yes.
the context is everything, and it's
Yes.
a great parallel to life, right? Where context is everything. I could have a major third, right? By the way, there is a major third in a minor chord. Just think about that for a second, okay? A chord has 3 notes, yes? And in the chord, it's a major chord, right, is actually made up of 2 intervals, and a minor chord is made up of 2 intervals. And in a minor chord, you have a minor third and a major third actually making up the chord. And we hear that as sad, even though both are present. Wrap your head around that.
That is fascinating.
So context is everything, and the position is everything. Just like, if I were to play a minor third or or if I would, let me say it this way, if I were to play a major third in an atonal piece, because again, the context is totally different, the harmonic context, you would probably not hear that as happy. Just again, I want to give the notion that context is everything to it.
And then you talked about context as far as historically. So like, the Asian cultures don't necessarily take minor chords as being sad, or the tritone, which is a chord structure, used to be illegal. It used to be banned. Music used to be deeply connected with the church. It was illegal to play was a tritone chord. Is that and you couldn't play that?
Yeah, yeah.
It was the devil's music to play such a thing, which is fascinating. And then the idea that music is contextual in history. So the instruments that Bach composed on are different. That piano or that keyboard is different than what Mozart had, than what Beethoven had. And understanding this, it shows you what they're able to do with that instrument. So understanding what they composed on, it's important to understand what technology that they had. And then we got into 430 versus 440 versus 432 as far as toning and frequency. And so that's the frequency of an A that orchestras or that a musician or composer would tune to. And Bach he did one of his pieces was called where is this? Tempered. I have this written somewhere. It's the
well-tempered clavier. Yeah.
The well-tempered clavier. And so that changed the tempering of the fifth note, which changed kind of like the feel of this piece. So musicians and composers would play around with their tempering of their instruments, the tuning of it, for it to have a different feel. So 440 versus 432. Verdi, who wrote operas, wanted 432 tuned, every A tuned to 432 for his singing, for his sopranos, and he actually had it written into law in the Italian Parliament that all symphonies, or excuse me, all operas had to be played tuned to 432.
Isn't that wild that he actually did that? He made it a law. He lobbied to make it a law. The frequency, the pitch of an orchestra, it's amazing.
It's incredible control. And then today, a lot of orchestras like the New York Philharmonic might tune to 440. A lot of music is tuned to 440 today. It's a little bit, it feels just slightly faster, more upbeat, a little bit higher frequency, which it is, and that people think that's more engaging. So a lot of music is tuned that way, but some of the sadder music is tuned a little bit more to 432. And so that's that. We don't know if there's an evil conspiracy to mess us up with 440 tuning or not, but it is slightly more arousing than 440 is slightly more arousing than 432. And then we got into the mental model of your time travel music. And basically, if I can distill it down, and you talked on this for a while, so I'm going to really condense it, is the idea of getting out of the way of what your body wants to express, what the universe wants to express, and what the piano wants to express. Once you have this technical capability and you're able to get in touch with your emotions, and then you're basically able to play and kind of get out of the way and feel with the instrument and express through that based upon what you're hearing and playing, not thinking, okay, I got to play this chord and then this chord, and then how does that sound? Getting your conscious mind out of the way, but letting the subconscious mind play and letting your body play and really flowing with the music. Is that a good representation?
Yes, beautiful. And just to clarify, it's mind travel. Time travel is the other music I can't mystic.
Oh, thank you. And then we talked about Beethoven versus Mozart, and you said you would play Beethoven on the piano versus Mozart. You could feel a difference. You could feel a difference, like in their lives as people, in the music, through the music that they're composing, which is just fascinating. That who they are leaves that kind of imprint through their music, and that their music is truly an expression of their life. And then we got into the questions. Music is storytelling. It's engaging and novel enough to keep you interested, but connected enough that you can follow and want to be with it. And so that's the key of a great composer, is to make it new and exciting. We're like, ooh, that was neat, and still allow them to follow without getting lost in the music. Kind of like, I would say, good jazz versus chaotic jazz is good jazz. You kind of understand some of what's going to happen. Chaotic jazz is a little bit difficult for me to understand. I'm sure somebody out there gets it. And then CK asked the question about, learning the mechanics versus getting out of the way. And you said the true exercise is presence, is being really present in my somatic self, and then expressing myself, and then turning off the distractions so I don't fall off the surfboard of surfing the wave of being really in tune. You said brain response to predictability and novelty. It's kind of balancing those two things, and getting into the flow state. You mentioned sadness kind of cracked your heart open with the death of your sister, and that it cracked your heart open, and that sadness allowed you to feel things, that express things that weren't accessible to you before. And that this is a common thing. This sadness, this grief is something that we see in a lot of geniuses in music. And you said vulnerability is a muscle. And like any muscle, we got to exercise it and use it. And we can even practice micro vulnerabilities and small shares to practice vulnerability. And music itself can be a share in vulnerability. And then my last note is that you are superhuman in June 2017 when you gave the performance of your life when you were not feeling oh so well.
Let's leave it at that.
And so that's what I got. So anything else you want to add to that, and any last lingering questions based upon the rapid fire summary that we had there?
That's an incredible summary for a 2-hour conversation, Robert. That's very impressive. That's a superhuman power. That's incredible.
Thank you. I was so engaged. I was typing notes this whole time.
Very
it's easy to pay attention when it's good stuff.
That's great. Yeah. By the way, just one additional anecdote that I thought of was when we think of, again, the universe as music. I mean, even the Earth. I mean, there's this notion called the Schumann resonances, and these are actually frequencies, long wave, slow frequencies that wrap themselves around the Earth based on the electromagnetic activity of the Earth and the ionosphere in particular relating to it. And these Schumann resonances, they're actual frequencies. They're the Earth singing. The main frequency is 7.83 hertz, a very long frequency. But the whole Earth is actually kind of singing as it spins around its axis and as it spins around the sun. It's quite really remarkable. You can literally think of everything in the universe as music and creating this cosmic symphony.
Wait, wait, I just want to make sure I want to share this with someone tonight. So you're saying that the Earth is singing as it spins on its axis?
Yeah, because of, again, we have this, right, this magnetic field around the Earth, right? So it interacts with the atmosphere, and particularly the ionosphere, and it creates these frequencies, right, that are spanning the equator, spanning the globe. And they change throughout the seasons and throughout the year, depending on the activity in the atmosphere. But they are at specific frequencies and multiples of those frequencies. Just as Pythagoras was talking about. And again, 7.83 hertz is this core Schumann frequency. By the way, Schumann is the scientist, not referencing the composer Schumann.
I was thinking composer when you said that.
Yeah. I just want to clarify that it's a scientist that discovered this and measured it. And it's just a beautiful phenomenon. It's literally the Earth kind of singing as it spins around, through the void of space. It's pretty nuts.
That's fabulous.
Yeah.
CK posted that link. I'm going to watch that in a little bit here. Thank you, CK.
Oh, cool. Okay, great.
Fabulous. Anything else you'd like to share, Murray, and any other burning questions in this awesome captive virtual Burning Man audience?
No, I think I've said enough.
Fabulous.
I'll let the music do the speaking for me going forward.
I totally got my burn just in this conversation alone. This was I mean, you gave it to me last night with the with the mind travel, and then again tonight, and then probably again Saturday night with the music and the art. This is shaping out to be a really good burn. Murray, thank you so much. This is so much fun. Thank you for sharing your genius and your insight and your desire to share all this with us.